Okay, so welcome to Living in the Map, Episode 4. I have to say I'm particularly excited about this conversation for a couple of reasons. First off, this is the first artist that I've had in this series. I don't say that because other people I've spoken with are not artists in their own way, but my guest here is a very interesting artist who I was actually a fan of one of his projects before I even knew who he was or what his name is. So I'm very happy to be here with Shabtai Pinchevsky. Shabtai, forgive me, I'm not going to be overly formal here, but I do want to just read a short excerpt from your bio, just so we have some of the formalities for the people who are learning about you for the first time. So Shabtai Pinchevsky is a photographer and a new media artist currently based in New York. His photographic practice is an extended one, employing video works, three-dimensional digital modeling, mapping, and archival work. He uses these tools and practices to explore local photographic histories and to investigate the political and social complications of the medium while reflecting on his own implications within the field. You were born in London. You went to art school in Jerusalem, and you have an MFA from Northwestern in Illinois, and you've won awards, and you make interesting work. So is that a decent intro, Shabtai, or what would you add on to that?
No, it's and a father recently.
And a father. Actually, I'll say people will find this kind of fun. So this is actually in the calendar event. I put Jerry and Shabtai take 4 because this is the fourth scheduled time that we tried to get together. The first time was the best reason to miss a scheduled meeting in the history of all existence, and that's because you became a father, and it happened, I believe, that very day, right?
Yeah, it might. I don't remember, but yeah, it's almost 3 months now.
So congratulations. And then we rescheduled because, because the child was so new and whatever, there was, stuff going on. And then I had an emergency local land meeting where I live. There was like a big land sale going on. I'm like, I'm so sorry. So anyways, we've made it work. So you make such interesting work, and you are, we wanted to talk about your creative practice, and we want to talk about, your work is not just constrained to mapping. It's not just constrained to photography. There's just a lot of thoughtfulness about history and place and different technological media that I almost hesitate to even, try to describe examples of it. I'll let you do that, but I do want to start with the reason that I first heard about you, and I warned you that I brought a prop, and this is probably not going to be that interesting, but I want to show you and see if you can identify this object, and you may not be able to identify it, but it's a very noisy object. Does this look like anything to you?
I guess that's like the chains that would be used to measure the first kind of, when starting a survey, they would use chains to
you got it.
First measurement, a baseline, right? A baseline measurement.
You got it. So it's noisy. I feel like Ebenezer Scrooge or something. I'm going to put this back on the floor. But the reason I brought that, because I'm the kind of weirdo who actually buys this stuff, but the first, so I can have a physical one. But the very first project that my team and I heard about, or how we experienced your work, was the project that you did called the Jefferson Grid. And for those who don't know, America is a very weird place for many, many reasons. And one of the earliest reasons that was sort of weird and interesting is how the land was originally mapped out here. Was everything outside of the 13 original colonies and much of the South was measured in 66-foot long chains that were used to create square mile parcels that were labeled and described, and then essentially, auctioned off to total strangers who had never been to them. And, and from there, I'm going to shut up. Do you want to describe a bit about the Jefferson Grid? I know it's not a fully current project, but I really want to hear your thoughts and use that as a gateway for getting into your work.
Yeah, that is one of those kind of works that was born from just hours of browsing Google Earth.
Yes.
There are a few of those. It was a time where I was really just exploring places, and I guess the United States was particularly interesting because I guess that kind of grid system makes everything. It generalizes everything, and then you can start digging in. I mean, there is a first kind of layer of organization of space that is just transparent or something like that, or it's even. And then it's interesting just to look at how, I guess it's like the New York grid, what people could create within that platform, within that framework of a grid. And when you start looking at the Jefferson grid, you see those amazing things, and you can look at that account and see just variations, right, versus a system. And so I was just browsing for hours, and sometimes with looking at images and Google Earth with a friend of mine was an analyst of aerial photography. So it would kind of give me those riddles, like it would place me somewhere. It didn't give me any location, and it would limit. It was like kind of GeoGuessr, but just between us.
I'm familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, so a GeoGuessr, but aerial view GeoGuessr, and I would need to understand what I'm seeing.
You just came up with a great idea for an app to be popular. It's the riff on that, which is like the Jefferson Guesser or something like that, right? It's like show me the square. Which state am I in? Iowa, Kansas. Yeah. But just to shout this out for people who have not seen it yet, you can find the Jefferson Grid on Instagram most prominently. And what years did it mostly run for? I know you posted one more at the end of 2021, which was a cool morph diagram.
Sometimes I get like I say, oh my god, I abandoned all of those 30-something thousand followers. I have to give them something. And
we're thirsty. We're thirsty. Honestly, like that. I know this sounds goofy, but it's fun. So like, so on that account, you'll find hundreds of these just beautifully like artistically cropped. They're painterly, and you find it's not just that they're squares of land, but you find ones that have like somebody's really using a square. Somebody shoved a bunch of circles into the square. There's a decay within the square, which is not square-like at all. There's just there's the square on top of the landscape that should not be bound by a square, right? It's just not natural. So they're beautiful. And then you did feed one more post at the end of 2021, which was using that technology that morphs. It was like, did you feed like many squares into it, and then it just morphs them together with like AI stuff, or what was that?
So yeah, something like that. So I would answer your first question. I think it started I started doing that 2013 perhaps. Yep. And maybe for the summer or something like that for 2 or 3 months, and then there was a pause, and maybe I came back a few months later, and slowly like those it kind of slowed down year by year. The last video that I posted, that kind of morphing, was I was using an application called Runway, which uses computer vision and AI, and I fed the entire or almost the entire feed of the account, and it basically created. So it's not morphing; it's actually generating new grid cells from what it learned from all those posts. So it's like a generative image maker of.
It's super cool, and not to deviate. I started playing around with a service called Midjourney recently. It's similar to DALL-E. I'm not sure if you saw that, but it's this like it's basically AI where it turns textual prompts into new images, and you sort of like click the ones you like better. It's like shockingly good. I just like it's a whole but I feel like that kind of technology and thinking of sort of like reimagining like photography and land and mapping is like right within themes that you work with in your practice. And it's funny you mentioned 2013. That's like the exact year that our team like set out to try to gather every property boundary in the US. That makes total sense that it was like like a handful of people in an office in Detroit going, look, you seen this account? We all had this book. I mentioned this book to you, the Measuring America. This is like the best. It's all about how that actually happened. And we're like, oh my God, this guy's like not speaking to us, but like we couldn't be more perfect, to like follow this and wonder about this and stuff. And so that maybe this is like a good point. So like, that's how I first experienced your work. And then I spent a lot of time on your website and on your Vimeo and just on your different accounts, kind of looking at like, okay, so this person did this project, like what else did they do? And you've got such an interesting just thought process and variety in the work that you do that I hesitate, I'll just to kind of like, paint a quick picture. And I want to hear just about your practice and where it comes from and what you're working on right now. But like, obviously you go into history a lot. There's a lot of archival things, but you work with technology a lot. You've got, questioning like photography, like, okay, here's a picture of a building. What if we made a picture of the same building, but used social media from thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that all took pictures of it in different ways, including like their shoes or something informal, and stitch them all together in some way to make a model that's built out of like a collective envisioning. You've done some stuff that's sort of like, I would kind of call it performance art in a way, where it was like you walked the literal border of Jerusalem, right? And took pictures, and you ended up hitting like things in the landscape where it's like, why are the borders like right here like this? This doesn't, like it doesn't, there's either a physical impediment or something else. It was just like a very kind of unnatural thing to do, but you took the time to like do that and see it. And then you've got some stuff like kind of the other pole, like you've got some like looping ambient kind of like video game environments of like endless warfare and very abstract, surreal kind of like looking things. And of course, many other things as well, but it shows like you've got an interesting eye and brain, and you use a lot of really interesting tools. Mapping and photography are part of it. But with me kind of setting that context, I'll shut up. I want to hear like, where's your practice come from? And like, what are the themes that you're constantly exploring here?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your interest in my work. I guess it's always best to kind of describe my education, because I started learning architecture first in the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design in Jerusalem. I studied architecture for three years, and before switching to photography, I realized I'm not going to be an architect, and I shouldn't waste. It's a 5-year degree, and I decided to skip the next 2 years and go to photography. But what I took from architecture was really the architectural document. What we learned is really the craft and the work of an architect. An architect doesn't build buildings. They don't physically go, and it's not their medium. Buildings are not the medium of architects, but rather the documents that they create in order to, well, both investigate a certain reality, a place, or a system, and then to intervene by proposing a plan and communicating all of that through documents that could show that the reality and that new reality that they propose. So the documents, the simplest documents are the plan or the section. And when it's a good document, when a document is crafted in a good way, it's a shocking reveal in a way. I don't know how to really describe it. It's a very pleasurable artifact. Looking at a section of a building that just kind of shows both like the system of how movement around that building works, like how life is being lived in that building or space. And there is something very strong about that. And I think in all of my works, I always kind of I want to continue doing that, to create those documents that are both aesthetically pleasing, but they have this kind of they reveal something.
Yeah.
And so those documents are obviously very much connected to place. And I think, and this is just looking myself at the work. It's hard, I don't usually describe my work to myself, so I have to look at it and then to figure it out the same way that you would do. And so
right.
Places, specific places, sites, sometimes very site specific, like one of my recent work for my graduation at Northwestern MFA was a video work that explores just a very specific amphitheater in Jerusalem, and looking at its history and so very site-specific places, but then also all kinds of geographical ideas in a way, like the watershed, which is something that, I don't know, it's a geographical concept that I'm really drawn to, and I've created works that kind of play around with that, with the watersheds of Jerusalem. And then mapping or creating maps as an activity, as some of the works. I was using mapping tools like the flight tour. I don't know if you've seen it, but using a flight simulator and intervening inside a flight simulator, showing archival photography, aerial archival photography that was taken in Palestine, showing and kind of reconstructing that landscape of Palestine before the creation of the State of Israel, and looking at all of that through a flight simulator.
May I ask you, so you mentioned the architectural background. Architecture is not necessarily synonymous, and forgive me if I'm wrong in this, because I'm naive of what it means to become an architect and train that way. But you also seem to have great familiarity and be very comfortable with software tools. And I'm not sure if you do any programming as well, but all your work, the way you move between these mediums that require some sophistication, including even just putting those images in a flight simulator, right? Even if to you that may not seem like a challenging thing to do, it may not occur to somebody who might be interested in this kind of topic, might approach it differently. So where does that part of your work come from too? Just the interest in tech and how you've kind of learned that and how you feel about those skills as a part of your practice?
I guess that's the part. It's like eventually there is a work, right? But it's kind of, it's always the result of all kinds of inquiries, I would call it, or interests. And so I guess at every certain point in time, I'm both looking at places and archives and certain subjects, but then also at different tools. And sometimes there is the rare occasion where all of them are kind of falling and fitting together into creating one work. And so I guess the tools and the technology is what sometimes, I don't know, I mean, yeah, it's really fascinating and exciting me. I guess every time something else kind of excites me, it's like different phases. So sometimes it would be the technology that kind of leads me to something, and other time I would be drawn to some specific material or some specific place. And yeah, what I'm fascinated about is, I guess, how technology allows us to look differently at places, to create those architectural documents, sometimes in different ways, in new ways, to look at places in ways that we couldn't before, to look at historical material in ways that we couldn't do before.
Can I ask you a funny question on that line? This just occurs to me where, okay, I feel like there's different kind of artists the same way there's different kinds of anything. I sometimes tell people the kind of person, for the business that we started doing this mapping work, it's made me realize two kinds of business people. One sees an opportunity to make money, pursues it because he can make money. Another kind says there's something that really should exist in the world. Maybe a business is the best way to do it. Let me go figure it out. It was more kind of the person that I am on that front. It was creative impulse on it. When I hear you talk about the work and I think about it, sometimes with an artist, you're trying to express something in a packaged work that's sort of hermetically sealed, and there's an idea within that work that exists by itself. And then sometimes artists will pursue processes or experiment with an idea that is actually a practice that other people could also do and take further. And I'm seeing in your work, the way that you're doing some of the experiments with tools and the kind of research and seeing things, it's almost like you're inventing stuff that it doesn't have to be one project. Like it could, like the technique could be like done again or scaled like in some way. And like even other people could participate in the activity. Because that's another thing with art sometimes. Like I know having gone to art school and everything, it was always like, you don't copy any other artist. Like if you do, like if that guy used forks in his work, no one else can use forks, right? It's just like he's the fork guy, right? But like when you're doing these really interesting things, like synthesizing historical material, displaying them digitally, geographically, it almost looks like something that like you're kind of like forcing it into existence, like a way that you would like to see things displayed like better and more of. That may not be true. Sorry, I'm not trying to like speak for you. I'm just trying to process like what I'm picking up from some of the things that you.
No, I think it's true. I think at least maybe not so recently, but in previous years, I always thought about I want my work to be a proposal, to have more. I always felt like they had more potential than what they actually do in reality. Or I was mostly driven by that, by saying, okay, this is a proposal. Think about what it would mean if we extend this. And I never think of myself as like an expert who has some very obscure knowledge that nobody can. It's like, for me, it feels definitely other people could continue with those activities. I'm not sure if they do, but but maybe more recently, I feel my works are more they're kind of more contained in a way, and I like that as well. I don't know. I want them to be also complete, but it's hard to complete and finish a work. There's always more to come from everything. Even that flight simulator work is something that I'm still working on, and it feels more like a platform where I could continue making those tours and taking people into a virtual flight tour and
and distributing them through different media. I mean, not to jump around, but like I got to ask, just because it's it's just like a contemporary thing. I just got my first Oculus Rift or whatever it's called now, MetaQuest. Just like maybe like two months ago around then, and like I'm no pro at it yet, but as somebody who had been interested in VR stuff before, I'd kind of been out of the game, and now I'm putting this on, going like, it's pretty damn good actually. Like right now, like what do you think about like different like AR, VR, just different like platforms to distribute stuff? Is it something that crosses your mind, or is it? And I guess I say that as opposed to like a gallery setting or something that exists on your website versus like, hey, there's these. Maybe does this become an Oculus app or something like that? Does that cross your mind, or is it not where your head is at?
Yeah, I guess not so much. I never really. Maybe I used one of them once, and I think for me that's exactly the problem. The fact that it's not so available, but also there is something about the fact that it's very, very private. Right? If you put this, for example, in the context of art or film, only one person can watch, and I mean, it has its own benefits or its own. I don't know if it's benefits, but like maybe it's like a new medium. But there is something which is. I want my work to address the public in a way, or to be more publicly available. And there's something about VR that kind of goes against that.
Especially today, you basically put on this giant motorcycle helmet and whatever. And we'll find ways to make it more social. But I hear you; it's not simultaneously shared by people in the public setting.
Yeah, and I'm very, as much as I explore a lot of technologies in 3D, in a way, when delivering a work, I'm still kind of a two-dimensional person.
Interesting.
And I just like the experience of being in a space, in a gallery, in a museum, and looking at work. And I don't, and you can say that you can put a VR helmet on your head and construct a gallery around you, but then there is no, what's the benefit there if it's just mimicking reality? So,
Yeah.
And okay, I mean, I have a few other ideas about VR, but I don't know. Eventually, we'll see if it takes over the world or not.
It's tough. It's tough to tell. My only like read on that recently is that like I was very surprised, as were some skeptical family members who like put it. They're like, I don't want to do that, and they put it on. They're like, holy crap.
Okay.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. So, and then there's the whole AR dimension too, where it's like, you know, overlaying while you're outside walking around and whatnot. But so I'm curious as well. I mean, it's my read in the space right now. I mean, you could have pushed me over with a feather when Mark Zuckerberg was like, we're rebranding the world's largest social network to build the metaverse that no one asked for. And it was like, what's going on behind the scenes here? And so it is curious to me. I think a lot of those technologies are probably getting better faster than many assume, but we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just curious because in your take on, you know, I'd like to hear more about your like thoughts on photography and just like because I know that's something that like I found very interesting looking at your work and some of the descriptions is this kind of like expanded view of the photographic that I imagine might even in your mind, you know, include things like Google Earth. Like you mentioned I mean, literally the Jefferson Grid is you're sort of taking photos of the Earth, but that required like exploration, creative cropping, you know, everything else like on this front. And so yeah, I'm curious to hear. I mean, maybe a good question is like, I don't know, what are you starting to work on right now? You know, in this vein, like what are your current projects or even things that you're playing with? I'd love to hear like stuff that's like, you know, you're even like thinking about doing, like what's on the mind.